So this is Brian Miller, and this is Chapter 5 for CTS 120. We're going to go over a little bit about supporting processors and doing some memory upgrades. This video is for part of your prep work for class. So take a look at this before you come to class, and we're going to do something that supports this in class. So if you've not gone through this, at least gone through this and also read the text, you're not going to be ready for class. And there will be an assignment as part of class. And if you have not done the prep work, you will not do well on it. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is things from Chapter 5, so let's get started. We've talked about a little bit about motherboards, a little bit more about processors. Today we're going to touch on the two of the major processor manufacturers, which are Intel and AMD. Shows a picture here, something you can check out, one of the ways that a processor connects. Features that affect performance and compatibility with motherboards. You can read through these here. The ones to take note of are the processor speed, of course the socket, the multi-processing abilities. That's something that you want to look at. Well, how many processors does it have? How many cores does it have? And then the term called multi-threading. The ability for a computer to go through and deal with multiple processes at the same time is called multi-threading. So one of the important factors that you want to keep an eye on when you are going through the process of dealing or of picking or choosing or upgrading or replacing a processor. Some more on that: memory cache, memory features, the support for virtualization. This is important if you're going to upgrading to Windows 7 because they had something called XP mode. And you had to have a virtualization enabled. Only in 64-bit operating systems was this available. It's important to know what you're buying so that if you need to support virtualization, you can. This is support for virtualization integrated within the processor itself, not an add-on like VMware Player or another one of these free players. Integrated graphics depends on the use of the computer that you're dealing with, so something to keep note of. And our basic components, our input-output unit, can read what that does, our control unit, and at least one ALUs, which is an arithmetic logic unit that gives you some comparisons, calculations, and it's basically the brain, how it makes decisions within there. You also have a register, also known, it's kind of like a cache, but a little bit different. And a cache is just a place, a waiting area, to hold data and instructions to be processed by the ALU. Buses connect components within the housing. Here's a graphical picture of it. You can see here where you have an input-output unit that gives you input and output on front side bus out to the rest of the computer. You have internal buses throughout here, and you can see how the control unit, the internal cache, the ALUs, and then the registers kind of work with each other in a real simple, quick graphic. How it works. The processor frequency is your speed. So the higher the frequency, the faster it'll go. The multiplier is a factor multiplied against the system bus frequency that determines the frequency. You can see there how they come up with that. Processors that are normally sold today that can process either 32 bits or 64 bits at the same time. The Intel I-Series will do that. That's some of the ones that we're going to look at. When you see x86, that's typically dealing with a 32-bit operating system. A hybrid known as x86/64 can handle either one, and then a pure 64-bit is x64, but it can also handle the 32-bit applications, and it simulates that 32-bit processing. So it has a separate registry, it has a separate section, and within System 32, if you're looking in a Windows operating system that has those sets of instructions and dynamic link libraries to be able to handle those types of applications. So it just simulates it. The difference between a hybrid and a 64-bit is that the hybrid processor actually physically handles 32-bit commands and applications as 32-bit, and then on the separate side does it as a 64-bit. And 64-bit processors, when it simulates that, it's basically just using a set of programs within its operating system to get the same effect. Memory cache, a place to store memory, a place to store commands. It's a way to it has L1 and L2 caches, which is just like, again, like a waiting area. And then you might have a shared L3 cache that everything uses. It gives you higher performance because you're not asking for information or sending information back to a source. It might store a set of commands or an instruction somewhere until it's ready to make a decision on that set of instructions, and then brings it back from the cache. The memory controller, you can read what that does. And here's a quad-core processor that shows that each one has its own interior or internal L1 cache, its own separate L2, and they share an L3. So this would be a good representation of how that works. Some current Intel processors. This is probably a little dated. It's printed in 2014, so you've probably got some more model numbers and different speeds that are available on Core i7 and i5s, but they're close. The speed up to 3.9 gigahertz, like we talked about, your frequency is your speed. Up to means that it will probably work at a lower frequency and a normal everyday load, but then we'll ramp up to 3.9 gigahertz, which is extremely fast in today's realm of processors when it needs it. Had 8 megabytes of cache, DDR3 memory. We'll look at that in a minute. Here's some more that you can look at. These are also in your book if you'd like to look through these and what their previous. You have your second generation and then your previous ones. So everything's an improvement on the last. So we've been dealing with Core i3 for several years now, and they just keep expanding. You can see the difference here. Core i3 up to 3.3 gigahertz, and then the second generation we bumped up to 3.4. It had it was dual core, 3 or 4 megabytes cache, slightly different. They actually went down in cache here. Either a DDR3 or DDR2 memory. Now it's just dedicated DDR3 because that's what the manufacturers are going to. So slight differences. If you look at Core i5, you'll probably see some others. 3 to 6 megabytes was the new one. 4 to 8. So they're doing a little bit of sharing. They're doing a little bit of moving things around when it comes to the cache to improve performance. All right, so in this example, they have the way you identify the processor is that it's basically like a model number, a make and model. So i7 would be your make, and the 940, 920 would be the differences in your model. And they'll probably have some performance differences, how fast they are, what their cache is. There's also some Centrino technology that's used in laptops, but more and more now you're having an iSeries as part of a laptop because they've advanced to the point where they will be small enough, thin enough to be able to be used in a laptop. When iSeries first came out, they were actually dedicated just for desktops because of their infrastructure, because of the way they were built. Now, because of that sharing of memory, sharing of cache, they're actually able to use that more so in a laptop environment. Again, some AMD processors, you can look at that. Pause it if you need to, look it up in your book, just to know what is out there. I'm going to skip over selecting and installing because that is not part of what we were going to do in this course. Feel free to go over it in your book, but we want to focus on memory. All right. So we'll switch over and start talking about RAM. It holds your data and instructions used by the processor. You have two different ones called static and dynamic RAM, and then this shows you a RAM slot, which you guys have done as part of a exercise already, is to take out and install a couple sticks of RAM in an old computer, but that's what they look like. You have different parts of dynamic RAM. That's the ones we're going to deal with is dynamic. Static RAM is not used as much. You have DIMM. You can see what that does. SODIMM, microDIMM. You can see where they're used, and you have also RIM and SIM, which are outdated, but we still mention those because we can see where we came from if we look at some of the older models. So the differences, you have the data path that each module accommodates, how data moves from the system bus to the module. As we've advanced, things have become more efficient, things have become more streamlined, there's less back and forth, there's less traffic within the actual module itself so that you get an increased performance. Here's some examples of some different ones. 240 pin, 184 pin, 168 pin. So you start at the top with the most recent DDR3 example. There are a lot of differences. And then we kind of step back. So to DDR2, to DDR, to SDRAM, to RAM. So you can kind of see if you've had older computers and this is something that you've dealt with before, these might look familiar. But this top one up here is the one that we're mainly going to be, that you'll probably be dealing with. Maybe some DDR2 if you work at a place that has some older components. And again, stepping back even further, 72 pin and 30 pin SIMs. All right. Couple different things for the DIMM. You can look through these. Some of their technology, some of the things that they're known for. Same for here. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because it's more or less just for informational purposes. Something good to know. Some different factors that affect your capacity, features, and performance. Here they are. Buffering, speed, number of channels. More on DIMM. Give you a couple seconds to read through that. Some of these, again, is more of informative, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about them. It's something that you can read. As far as the DIMM technology, when we moved into what they call Sandy Bridge chipsets, which is the second generation of the I-series, they started using the quad channeling. It uses 8 memory slots that you can see here. The processor can access four slots at a time using 2 different channels. So you can see there's RAM slots, 4 RAM slots here, and 4 RAM slots here. So hopefully what you're thinking now is, man, I could put a lot of RAM in this machine. Because if each stick of RAM, let's say is 2 gigs, 2 times 8 is 16. I can get 16 gigs of RAM. Windows 7 recommends that you have at least 4. Just 4. Now you have the ability to quadruple that, all right? So that's most desktops are able to go up to 16 gigs of RAM. Some laptops are now too, but typically you'll see about 8 gigs of RAM in those. To set up a dual channel, you have to have a pair of DIMMs and that have to be equally matched in size, speed, and features, and you should use the same manufacturer. If you buy 2 from the same manufacturer with the same model number, you're ensuring that you're setting up dual channels easily. You buy 2 from the same manufacturer with the same model number, you install that RAM in the channel, in the slot, and then when the computer fires up, the BIOS senses that change, and it automatically sets up your dual channel because those size, speed, and features requirements are met. And you don't have to do anything else. To do a triple, again, now we're dealing with 3 matching DDR3 DIMM RAM sticks. Again, as long as they're the same configuration, you can have a triple channel. You can read about that in your book about why triple channel, double channel is important and what that does for you. We measure speed in megahertz and PC rating. The PC rating is listed here. You can see what that rating is. As we get further into the chapters, we'll show you how to look up the PC rating on the computer itself in a Windows environment so that you can see what can be changed, what can be tweaked and modified to give you something a little bit better as far as how to improve your PC rating. Some more on single, double, memory banks, dual ranked. You can read through this for information on how this goes. A little bit more on DIMM technology. Go ahead and look through this. Pause if you need to. I'm just going to keep advancing. Some buffered and unregistered. Some differences here. Again, these are things that are pulled out of your book. Your best bet is to look these up in your book to get a better idea of how this works. The rim stuff is here for you to look through. I'm not going to cover it. It's not used anymore, not used in the majority of today's recent computers. So you can look through this and see where we've come from. It's a good idea to see how we've progressed through the RAM generation, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. How to upgrade memory. You guys have seen this before. You've actually gone through the process of swapping things out. You're basically adding more RAM modules or adding RAM modules that have more RAM on them. You might be taking out two 1 gig RAM sticks and putting in two 2 gig RAM sticks for a total of 4. The problems that they solve are listed here. If you have any of these, if you have an insufficient memory message, typically you might want to free up or upgrade RAM. RAM is pretty cheap right now. You can get 2 sticks, about 4 gigs of DDR3 RAM for about 25, 26 bucks. They come for about $13 to $18 a stick. And these are from a bunch of different, if you buy HP, if you buy branded sticks of RAM, it goes up from there. But there are quite a few out there that are the exact same features that are branded as HP. But you'll pay half the price. Questions to ask. How much do I need and how much is currently installed? How many and what kind of modules are currently installed? If you don't know, power down the PC and look inside. There's a couple other ways to do it. How many and what kind of modules can I fit? How do I select and purchase? How do I physically install? These are all questions to ask if you don't know all the answers already. The best answer of how much do you need is all you can get. This says Windows 7 requires at least 2 gigs of RAM. They recommend 4. The RAM limit for a 32-bit operating system is 4 gigs of RAM. It will not use anything more than 4 gigabytes because of the way it's structured. So if you have a 32-bit operating system and then you upgrade yourself to 8 gigs of RAM, you're wasting your money. Open the case and look at the slots. How many are filled? If you're dealing with a laptop and you only have 2 slots and each slot has one in there, then take a look at what size the stick is. So if you have 2 gig sticks to make 2 gigs of RAM, then you would want to buy 2 of the 2 gig sticks to upgrade to 4. Examine the module for physical size and notch position. If you buy the same model number, if you buy the same manufacturer, a lot of times these CDW, Amazon, all these places you can buy things online, you can actually put in requirements of what type, DDR3, 240 pin, SD RAM, whatever the search requirements are. You can even go in as far as to look at the motherboard documentation, and as a last resort, take the motherboard and old memory modules to a good computer parts store for confirmation. I don't necessarily recommend that because you will have plenty of tools available to you to figure this out on your own. DIMMs can be installed as single modules. DDR3 board supporting triple channeling. Again, going back and see what you can do if you have that ability for 3 channels. How many and what kind of modules can fit. Again, you need to look at matching 2 DIMMs for dual channels. If the 4th slot is populated, the board reverts to single channeling. So depending on how you want it done, 3 channel, dual channel, you need to make sure that you're looking these up so that you can adequately configure the RAM in the right way. Here's more on how many and what kind. A few more. Couple things to note, matching things up, black sockets versus blue sockets. How do I purchase and select? We've talked a little bit about that. You can read through these and talking about mixing memory speeds. One thing to notice is your modules perform at the slowest speed. I would pick the highest speed for the lowest price. That's how I would always approach it. Use your website. We talked about that. CDW, some other ones, Newegg, Kingston, a lot of different ways to search for this stuff. Here's some precautions. You can read through those. It's just like working inside the machine, which we've gone over before. Pull out the supporting arms on the sides of the slot. Use the notches on the edge as a guide. Insert straight down. Make sure that you're pushing down to until the arms click back into place. A couple things to note if you're dealing with RAM, because if you have to deal with that in an older computer, typically not. And then that's it as far as the recording goes. So make sure you look at this. I'll have one of these posted every week so that you can get into what we're going to be doing in class, and you'll be prepared and you'll get a good score on the in-class activity. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in class or shoot me an email.